Hi everyone. I would really encourage everyone to switch on their cameras. I think it really makes for an interactive experience. Of course, this depends upon your comfort and there's no compulsion as such. Um, with this, I think we can begin our workshop for today. Welcome everyone to the second annual SLR workshop. Before we begin the substantive part of the session, please allow me to flag the format of today's session. We will first have Shrishti from the editorial team who will be introducing the speaker as well as the session. Then Professor Narrain will begin with introductory remarks and move on to the main part of our discussion. We will then have comments from Professor Manpreet Dhillon, who will introduce LastNet as well as the community of scholars who are a part of it. Finally, Jyotika and Lippy from our editorial team will provide a brief overview of SLR as well as its editorial policies. Thank you all once again for joining us today. Over to you, Shrishti.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Shrishti and I'm from the editorial board of SLR. Thank you for joining us today for the session. The SLR workshop was conceptualized as a way of introducing interdisciplinary work that is grounded in law and social sciences to students, lawyers, activists, and academics alike. We recognize that the field did not receive adequate attention, particularly in law schools, and we seek to correct it through our workshop in an accessible manner. Our first edition was conducted by Professors Saurabh Bhattacharjee and Sushmita Patil. And for our second edition of the SLR workshop, we are excited to host Dr. Siddharth Narrain, who is a lawyer and a legal activist. His work focuses on public law, law and media, human rights law, and gender and sexuality related law. Siddharth's PhD thesis, titled Facebook's Crowds and Publics, Law Virality and the Regulation of Hate Speech Online in Contemporary India, investigates how virality has enabled digital harms, including hate speech online, that has led to serious challenges to perform governance in Indian context. He has been a lecturer, lawyer, and a journalist, and we're truly honored to have him today for hosting our workshop. Along with Professor Narayan, we also have today Professor Manpreet Singh Dhillon, who will be introducing us to the LastNet initiative and to the community of socio-legal scholars who are a part of it. With this, I hand over the stage to Professor Siddharth Narayan to initiate our today's session. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Nivedita, Divya, Srishti, and everyone else at the SLR for inviting me to speak. I have only interacted with you previously as a contributor to the journal, so it's nice to be able to speak to you and to the community of mostly students who I understand would be on this call. Okay, so I've been asked to, what I'll do today is broadly speak very briefly about how I understand what social legal research slash scholarship is from my perspective, my disciplinary perspective, which is, of course, that of somebody trained in the law, like many of you, trained primarily in the law. Okay, so and then, of course, I'll try to look at it in a slightly wider perspective of how perhaps we can understand social legal scholarship and social legal research to be something broader than if we remove ourselves from our disciplinary perspective, how do we look at this? Okay, and then yeah, okay. So let me start. So I want to do this through two ways. So the first part, I'll just be addressing what I understand by social legal scholarship. And to do this, I want to look at two parts. First is how do I understand social legal scholarship by looking at social legal methods? And the second part I'll address, which might segue nicely into what Manpreet is going to speak about, which is community. How do we understand this through being part of a community of social legal scholars? Okay, so now, in terms of the methodological point, here I am going to primarily rely on one of the readings, which I'm going to just type in the message. which is an article written by a professor of mine from the University of New South Wales, which is called Judging the Quality of Legal Research. Uh, and it's by Professor Theonis Rue, who actually visited NLS. So some of you might have had a chance to interact with him last year. He is the Dean of the School of Public and Global Law at the University of New South Wales Law School, Faculty of Law and Justice. Uh, okay, I'm not going to type the whole thing. You can look it up. But it's Legal Education Review. Yeah, it's a 2014 article. Okay, and he looks at it from the perspective of basically somebody who's been somebody who's working within the law school. How do we understand from an there's a hand up. Okay, how do we understand this from somebody trained within the law? Okay, so I guess some of this, if you all attended the previous session last year, I assume that you would have covered some of it. But from the perspective of legal scholars and law students, um, if we were to understand social legal scholarship, we also have to understand it with respect to doctrinal methods. Okay, people who do doctrinal work. And so it is a bit of a comparison, right? So the way I understand it is that you have doctrinal method, which is conducted, as you all are aware, is conducted by legal insiders for other legal insiders. And doctrinal method primarily deals with how a body of law ought to be understood or improved, right? So in terms of what we give different kinds of interpretation, and you argue that this is the best form of interpretation, and that has certain kind of impact within the legal system. It influences how judgments are seen and interpreted and so on. So very much invested in that process. Now, most doctrinal scholars, even if you look around you at NLS, the faculty, most of the doctrinal scholars will not identify as purely doctrinal. Very few people I know who identify as purely doctrinal scholars. So, in a sense, they are engaging with something outside of pure doctrine in terms of other kinds of scholarship. Now, one of the kind of distinguishing ways that we think about doctrinal scholars, uh, I suppose, if you generalize, look at law as a separate form of knowledge that's above or different from the social, while social legal scholars, in opposition to that, would look at um, law being a form, right? A particular body of knowledge that is influenced by society, that it both influenced by and influences society, politics, economics, uh, history, and all of that. Okay, so in a way, not so in a way we can't see it as a separate domain. Now, as I was saying, I don't think most people would identify as purely doctrinal either. A lot of people, I think, even doctrinal scholars nowadays engage more and more with qualitative, quantitative methods and other forms of methods that actually speak to this fact that it's not closed off in that way. Now, how do we understand social legal research methods in comparison to doctrinal methods? Of course, social legal methods from the literature and from my understanding is a very broad umbrella term. It can include all different kinds of research methods, but one of the commonalities is they are mostly interdisciplinary. They're concerned with understanding of law in its social context. They engage with both law and at least one other social science or humanities discipline. Now, if I were to look at it from my own experience of doing this work, it's not as if I've been trained formally in some other social science or humanities subjects. But over a period of time, I've engaged closely with material from, besides law, of course, material from, I think a lot of material from politics, international relations, some material from history, of course, media communications, journalism, and things like that. So, in that sense, I would see myself as engaging, not that I've been trained in I've been trained in journalism, but besides, I've not been trained in like any of these humanities or social science subjects. I have attended courses on them, but I've engaged with the literature. So I suppose one could look at it that way too. Not that you have to be formally trained, but are you engaging seriously with this literature? Now, um, within the broader socio-legal studies, lawyers or social-legal scholars, that legal scholars dealing with social-legal methods, they do a particular kind of research. Okay, so on the one hand, people like me, or perhaps legal scholars doing social legal work, on the one hand, we are bounded by traditional doctrinal research, those who do traditional doctrinal research and those kind of methods. And the other hand, you have pure social science, humanities methods and work. Okay, so kind of bounded in that, working in that space, we are bounded by both of these. Um, so Theonis Rue actually has a very interesting, I think, a useful uh, line here from this article. He says socio-legal research, the characteristic feature of it is not just its interdisciplinarity, but its pursuit of a particular kind of interdisciplinarity, one that attempts to synthesize the participatory insider perspective of doctrinal research with the conceptual frameworks and methods of at least one social science or humanities discipline. Okay, so I think this is a good starting point for us as law students and legal scholars to understand what we mean by social legal research. I think this is a very good definition to start off with. And of course, Professor Ru also alerts us to the problems and dangers of doing social legal research, is that sometimes you fall what he calls falling between two stools. That is, you are neither very good at, you neither become very good at doctrinal work, and neither are you engaging very seriously with social science methods. So that is something he's alerting us to, saying that if we are doing social legal research and we identify and want to do this kind of work, we also have to engage with, as lawyers, engage with social science methods more seriously, and also doctrinally, doctrinal methods. We have to take those in those norms also seriously, those practices also seriously. Okay, um, and um, so move to the second part of what I'm going to say, which is what actually drew me to the discipline, and that connects to the question of community, the community of social legal scholars. And what drew me to this actually was my engagement in my involvement with the larger community of social legal scholars in India and South Asia, primarily through the Law and Social Sciences Research Network, which I want to talk about in more detail. I'm not going to talk about too much detail, but through LastNet, but also through the Law and Society Association in the US. I've attended one of the conferences, but also engaged with people from there, and many of them are part of LastNet. And it's through my and particularly scholars at the Center for Study of Law and Governance at JNU, the centers, the center, the School of Law and Governance and Citizenship at Ambedkar University, the Department of Humanities in at IIT Delhi. So these are the spaces, kinds of spaces I've engaged with people through these networks, and that actually drew me to this. I would say drew me to identifying as a social legal scholar eventually, and also expose me to a slightly broader understanding of how we might understand this. Okay, so for instance, if we were to take, not from the perspective of a legal scholar doing social legal work, but say people who are part of these networks who are trained in other disciplines, then how do we see social legal scholarship? And in that sense, I would see the work of, say, scholars like Professor Pratiksha Bakshi, Nirja Gopal Jayal, Pratap Banu Mehta, Veena Das, Ginny Lokanita. You all might have be aware of some of their work. None of them are trained in law formally, but they engage very seriously with legal issues that we read and we quote and we cite. And so understanding this helped me understand that perhaps social legal scholarship can be also understood from that perspective, of those trained in other disciplines engaging with the law, many of whom who are teaching at NLS and other law schools now, right? Um, and so, for instance, the work of Parvez Modi writing on the Special Marriage Act, the history of the Special Marriage Act and its application, or Jyoti Puri writing about Section 377 of the Indian Penal Code, Professor Ravi Sundaram writing about piracy and media censorship. So these are examples of I would think of, they may not identify social legal scholars themselves, but in would definitely form part of the social legal community and scholarship, that how I would understand it. Okay. Now, uh, to the third part, the last part of what I'm going to say is, how do I see this? And one of the things I think is, how do I see this discipline currently and the role within legal scholarship in India? Okay, so coming to the present. And I think here I would just say that just to look around me at those on this call, but also at NLSIU where I'm teaching now, uh, is just the institutional setting where legal scholars are increasingly being exposed to and working alongside people trained in other social science and humanities uh, disciplines and policy, right? And so whether it's NLS, Nalsar, BITS Law School, the IIT departments of humanities in the IITs, or Jindal Global Law School, what all these in all these spaces, there seems to be a way in which organically colleagues will be working with each other, hopefully engaging with each other. Shivnadar Law School is the other one. So, from my own experience, for instance, I had a colleague the other day who's a historian who came up to me and said, "Look, I really want to attend a legal methods course or a constitutional law course. I want to really understand how law is taught from the inside." And I was thinking about that. I was thinking, organically, if these things happen, it'll enable in this kind of interaction better. And even from my perspective, now I've been involved with the syllabus refinement of the syllabus, especially the common core for the BA, the new BA course that are going to be offered in July at NLS. And over there, I'm engaging with the social science and humanities faculty more seriously through that exercise. Okay, so organically, how the kind of interaction. So perhaps over a period of time, there'll be more people writing with each other, co-teaching. So I think there is the institutional setting to take this forward. And hopefully, one form this could happen is through fora like LASNet, which Manpreet will talk about. But hopefully, there'll be other kinds of formal and informal opportunities to do so, where we can think about social legal research and scholarship more rigorously. And what does this actually mean in terms of method, disciplinary boundaries, and community? Okay, I'll stop there. So hopefully, there'll be more in the discussion.
Thank you, Professor, for those introductory remarks. I was wondering whether it would be now possible for us to zoom in closer to the paper that we had circulated to the community, which is Professor Claude and Gowen's Irresponsible and Indefensible paper. I think this was a particularly important paper for us coming from an editorial perspective, because very often our editorial team and our editors, we struggle to understand a paper and its merits, as it were, um, based on its engagement with the law. Or on the other side, we also sometimes are unsure about whether it meets a certain interdisciplinary standard to us. One of the comments that they especially catch upon and they sort of contemplate in this article is that a peer reviewer comments on the article stating that your paper doesn't engage with the actual reality, including specific laws. I was wondering how it would be possible for us as editors, as social legal researchers. How do you see us engaging with the law? And is it necessary that we need to employ these traditional methods, such as doctrine or closely understanding a statute, or is it a more broader engagement with legality in itself?
Having posed to me or to the group?
This is to you, Professor.
Okay, so I think as journal editors, especially I had a quick look at the SLR website, right? And the kinds of things. So the way that you'll have set yourselves up as a forum for broadly social legal research and social legal work that goes much beyond even what I was talking about. So the way that I would understand the way you framed yourself is actually closer to the second part in terms of the social legal community rather than the first part of what I was talking about, which is a much more narrow conception of what social legal scholarship is, right? So given that that is the case, I would say definitely uh, you would have to take a broader view. But also, I think particularly these kind of things, as peer review, people doing peer review or journal editors, I think there is a responsibility, I think, to think about some of the things that we were talking about just now, right? So if it's not as though you want to exclude certain kinds of scholarship, but if it is, say, for instance, an article that's dealing with say it's an article dealing with mixed methods. Okay, a lot of people do mixed methods work. So doctrinal scholars who do dealing with doctrine, but also social science and humanities. So are they engaging with these methods seriously? How seriously are they engaging with? So you need some peer reviewer who will be able to give you a grasp of that. If it's if it's purely dealing with social legal in the sense of legality more broadly and not from an insider's perspective, sure. But then you need a peer reviewer from that particular discipline that they're dealing with or subdiscipline or will be able to gauge whether what they're doing meets the standards of the conceptual standard or the standards of that particular subdiscipline or discipline. It has to be something that you're, it's not about whether I would say take a broader view. It's definitely from perspective of SLR, it makes sense to take a much broader view because SLR is also one of the a journal like SLR I would say is one of the fora for enabling this form of community because community is not just about conferences, it's also about you know being able to publish in this group and reading other people's work. But how do we ensure that we don't fall between two stools? That's what Professor Theonis Rue is warning against. That you don't fall in a situation where neither is it the article doing justice to doctrine and neither is it doing justice uh, to the social science. Of course, in this article, it clearly seems as if the authors know exactly what they're talking about, and it's a sophisticated argument, and that the peer reviewer has just not has been blind to that. So that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about more generally the kinds of things you may come across.
Thank you, Professor, for your comments. We were also wondering whether you had any general thoughts on this article and how perhaps um, in the process of writing and publishing on this subject, um, eh, authors and editors, as well as peer reviews, can engage with each other.
So on the article itself, I'd be more curious to hear what other people think, including you, all of you from SLR. I myself, I found it interesting as a particular example, but more broadly speaking, from my experience of engaging both with doing peer reviews, but also sending things for peer review. I think one of the challenges with interdisciplinary and social legal work is that and doing that kind of work, but also doing peer reviews on that particular kinds of work, is that it's such a broad umbrella term that the there are many instances where you will not have subject knowledge expertise of that particular area. It's very broad, and even to for us, for instance, if I were to get asked to be peer review an article, okay, and somebody is dealing with say STS, science and technology studies, scholarship, or they're dealing with certain form of environmental law and materiality in relation to environmental law, right? So looking at the material aspects of, say, I don't know, the Chipko case or the Tasmanian dam case. Uh, I will be able to understand it to some extent. I'll be able to use my expertise. But beyond that, uh, given the broad nature of this, you'll require people to rely on people who will be able to, who have done that kind of work, who will be able to say something seriously to that. While if you were a much narrower, if you were doing more traditional doctrinal publishing, etc., then the field is a little smaller. So the chances of you being able to peer review or being reviewed and understood is higher, given that it's a narrower kind of thing that we're dealing with. So the social legal research is something that's evolving, is broad, is very interesting, and what you're able to do with it is quite a lot. And you want to be outside of the confines of traditional doctrinal research, etc. You want to be dealing and engaging with all these concepts from social sciences, but are we doing it rigorously is the question. So that's the thing. So how do we as people who are peer reviewing and writing and so on, uh, ensure that we are able to do it in a serious way? So I guess so those are challenges that I've seen.
Lippy, I don't think you're audible. I think. I think you're on mute. Yeah, I think Divya has a question. In the meantime, I think we can, or yeah, yeah, Divya. Um, Divya, you're on mute. If you could unmute yourself, I have enabled microphone access for you.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, the question that since you began your introductory remarks with a methodology, I wanted to ask how how sound is it to include, say, in an interdisciplinary paper, um, socio-legal paper, the sort of details of methodology in the paper itself, because oftentimes uh, we get papers where methodology is described. It's like sample surveys and things like that. And a lot of the times, even if the argument has some merit, there are a lot of problems on the methodological side of things. It's not as if sometimes we think, okay, maybe it's the sampling is not done very comprehensively. At other times, we also feel like it's not sufficiently justified, the inferences from, say, the raw data they often provide in annexures. So I was wondering how you would sort of navigate writing out a proper like methodology section in a social legal piece, and how much of the review would depend on an assessment of the soundness of that description of the methodology. So that was one question that I had.
Okay, that's a very good question, not just for peer review articles, but I think more generally, anybody writing or publishing in this field, I think more and more methodology is a must. Methodology section is an absolute must. Um, in terms of indicating, um, even if we are not using a statistical method or something very, where you would have obviously do it, but even if you're doing, say, I don't know, some sort of law and context analysis of doctrine or whatever, something where you might not think it's obvious. I think more and more it's incumbent on us especially as legal scholars doing social legal work, to be very clear about what is the methodology that is involved, and have at least be explicit about it. In terms of how rigorously you describe it, etc., that it would depend on the resource. It would depend on the particular article, and what and how key that method is, and how much material perhaps it's a really case to case basis. But at least some effort to make it explicit and say that this is the method, put it out there, this is the method, even though I'm not, it is. And I think this is the case. I think it should be not only for social legal but also for doctrinal. If you ask me, even doctrinal scholars should be putting out their methodology, but it becomes more important in social legal scholarship, because at least in doctrinal scholarship sometimes other doctrinal scholars will assume there's certain kind of assumptions that you understand. But for social legal scholarship, especially when we are engaging with other disciplines in whatever way, limited or in more seriously, in whatever way you do so, to say that this is an approach, I'm taking a law and context approach or a social legal method approach, I'm engaging with literature that does not fall within law, how I understand. So just to be explicit about it, and just have one section there, I think that is very important. And of course, then it would depend on, I mean, to be able to do it, because also the literature on methodology, social legal methods, as far as I understand, the literature itself is something that's still nascent in some ways. Social legal methods, especially in our context and what we are talking about, it's something that's still, I think, a lot required in terms of people are still thinking about it, but at least to that extent. Mhm.
Lippy, we still can't hear you. We're so sorry. Um,
Maybe she can type it.
yeah, I think
Yeah,
that
you
should
can
work.
type it on the chat. Yeah.
Just a note to the other participants on the call as well, please raise your hands or use the Q&A or the chat option. We can then um, ask Professor Narrain, Professor Manpreet for their comments on your questions. Yes, Ritu. Just, yeah, please go ahead and ask your question. Your mic is enabled. Ritu, your mic is on mute. You can unmute yourself and speak. I've enabled access. Uh, okay, I think there are some technical issues with the microphone. If please go ahead and type out your questions. I think we can then proceed to discuss them.
While we're waiting, maybe it'd be interesting to hear what you other people here thought about that article, and what.
Okay, so we actually have Ritu's question. So if I can just read it out. You discuss the risk of falling between the two schools, neither excelling at doctrinal work nor social science methods. How can one personally balance these competing demands in their research? Additionally, how do you see socio-legal methods offering unique insights that purely doctrinal or pure media study approaches might miss? If you could give an example from your own work.
Okay, so the second part of Ritu's question, um, okay, so for instance, if you're working on, say, something like what I work on, which is the history and regulation of hate speech on social media platforms, and if I had done if I were to approach this purely from a doctrinal perspective, then it's only that much that I can say to this. Okay, you can look at doctrinally how hate speech laws evolved, look at some of the public order cases, perhaps look at maybe the doctrine isn't very coherent, and maybe some comparative stuff. If you look at comparative doctrine, then you get some kind of idea how to place this within that context. Perhaps even you can go beyond, you can look at, you can apply doctrinal methods to maybe the Facebook Oversight Board's cases. You take an expansive view and look at how some of these decisions have evolved to get a sense of what's happening. But that really does not help you explain, for instance, what are the ways in which, for instance, technology, virality, uh, the fact that these media infrastructures have undergone a certain kind of change, and how do we see, for instance, platforms themselves and their politics intervening in this? What are the roles of these institutional actors, and in what way does the doctrine actually interact with the social, historical, technological context? The materiality, for instance, of this. So, if you're saying a platform like Facebook governs hate speech or speech more generally, how do they do it? What is the nitty-gritty? So, for instance, if we start looking at that, this involves all kinds of questions. For instance, what are the material infrastructures, both in terms of, say, the internet-enabled mobile phones, the fact that internet can be used at a low cost in India, uh, those kind of questions, so those kind of infrastructures, but also the infrastructures of governance. So, what are these different bodies and institutions that a platform like Facebook has already set up? Who are, what are these governance processes, and how does regulation happen through this? Okay, so there are a range of questions that would open up to you if you were to look at it from what you might understand broadly as social legal. Also, this is slightly different from looking at it purely from a platform studies perspective. There, of course, is literature from there, but it is scholars who are able to straddle some of the most cited people in this area are people like Kate Klonick, a journalist and scholar who's basically written about this, a legal scholar and a journalist who's written about this, who teaches at a law school, able to deal with both the doctrine quite um, effectively, but also these kind of infrastructures of governance. Okay, and so people like that, so people like, for instance, and I'm talking about very particularly my area. So people like scholars in a bunch of scholars who have been working at it in Germany, who've been given access to some of what Facebook does within their platform. So some of the most cited and interesting work in the area are actually scholars who are able to straddle both the doctrine and also the law and context question and the materiality question. Okay, and so I feel like doing social legal work also gives you that opportunity to deal with this question. Materiality is just one example, but enables you to deal with some of those questions that push the envelope and go beyond purely just either one or the other. Now, how do we ensure that we don't fall between? I mean, it's a question that everybody in this area is grappling with. It's not something I can really say, because it's something that I would also be thinking about consciously every time we do this kind of work. But often parts of it will be by trying to present it at fora. For instance, if you're doing this kind, for me, I would have to try and present it in say fora where people from say platform studies or philosophers or cultural studies people are there. So there you get the kind of questions and interrogation that you might get, questions, suggestions will help you further refine your project, seek out literature, try to understand perhaps where there are deficiencies and address some of those gaps, while of course being quite clear that for me at least, that I am a legal scholar primarily, and that is a legal scholar invested in social legal work and dealing with this literature, but which I want to deal with in a serious way and do justice to. But I'm not a platform studies person, and neither am I a media studies person. So obviously that so you have to kind of be quite aware, I think, where you situate yourself in approaching this.
Thank you, Professor. Uh, I think Alaka has a question.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Hi, Professor. So I'm a first year MPP student, Masters in Public Policy. So I had a question on the intersection of, social legal work and policy with the growing importance of policy and understanding policy. So like, how can a student like me sort of contribute to social legal scholarship?
I think a lot of a lot of social legal work speaks to policy very directly. Issues like law reform, understanding, because a lot of it is law and
Yeah.
context and applied work that can be applied. The only distinction, the only kind of one of the tensions that emerges, as far as I understand, in the history of how social legal work has evolved, is that there has been some debate about social legal work not being made too instrumental. That is, that policy should not determine the way that social legal work moves. That is from the perspective of social legal scholars, but from the perspective of people who are studying policy and doing policy, I think social legal methodologies are particularly useful if you're dealing with policy work, because I think they give you they would give you a better grasp and better way to approach policy issues. So whether, for instance, if you're dealing with, I don't know, um, displacement policy in India, displacement through large projects. It's, I think, the social legal scholars who are writing on that, and by social legal, I mean both social science scholars who are dealing seriously with law, who approach law, and also legal scholars who use social legal methodology. It's that area actually you'll be primarily dealing with rather than very doctrinal working. That's the kind of literature you'll probably already be dealing with, in my sense of it, in your as you go along. So yeah, so it'll be interesting to look at social legal methodology then, whether you can apply that as a part of the methods when you're being explicit about the methods. As a policy person, whether social legal methods is something that could be useful to explicitly apply while you are engaging with that literature.
That's helpful. Thank you, Professor.
I think there's the questions in the chat, right, Lippies?
Yes, Professor. If I can just read it out for everyone's benefit. The paper, and she's referring to the paper by Professors Claudia and Cohen. The paper talks about the need to expand the idea of law beyond traditional law in the social legal research. Here, how do you manage the tension between interdisciplinarity and the risk of one discipline, that is law, overpowering others? I think this is coming particularly from the fact that we are, in fact, law students. How else do we prevent the social legal binary in quotes, and move beyond it?
Look, I don't have a direct answer to this, but I'll give you a kind of sideways answer to this, which is if we look at realms like law and economics, law and say law and history, or law and economics is the example. So you have this emerging law and media, which is what I do. So if so, we're thinking about interdisciplinarity from that lens, like a lens, law and dash. So there you have, okay, so for instance, law and media. So the idea that one discipline will overpower the other, I think at some level, uh, it depends on how. So if you're somebody, say you're somebody who's a purely doctrinal scholar, who's doing, I don't know, who's dabbling with some, who's writing on broadcasting law or whatever, right? So you're not going to identify as a law and media scholar. If you're identifying as a law and media scholar, then I think there, by definition, you're saying that you're more engaged with that literature. And as I said before, often is the thing is that you may not be trained in this. There are very few people who will be trained in both these disciplines. But it should be reflected in your bibliography, in the way that you're engaging with the literature, your initial survey of literature, who you're speaking to, who your audience is, and the doctrinal part of the work that you do. How does it? How do we how do we use a kind of law in context method to that particular field? Okay, so whether seeing the law, particularly in relation to economics or politics, right now, there's always the risk of of perhaps being legal scholars, being more steeped in that. I don't see this as particularly that much of a problem, because really what we are bringing to the table is our insider understanding of the law, which most other people will not have. And we're trying to marry that to this particular expertise in this field. Unless you happen to be, an Atre Majumdar who is trained in anthropology and trained in law and on those kind of examples. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about people who are trained in law primarily and then who are trying to engage with these disciplines. Somewhere, I think we are also trying to say that we understand this from an insider's perspective, and we're trying to bring this insider's perspective to engage more seriously with this particular, the other, this and. I don't think that I would see it as purely as a negative. I think you can also frame it as a positive way of something you bring to the table, as long as the and is not completely just there as a, you're just putting it there for the sake of it. There is that engagement, of course, you need to. And that I think will come from this community we're talking about. That community is helpful to reflect on these things.
Um, I think Professor's question was a good segue into introducing last minute. So, Professor Manpreet, if you could now
There's one more
introduce.
question there. Is that done on the chat?
We have Shrishti's question. We can either take it up now or we can take it up after Professor has anything works. And also, Professor Manpreet, you are more than welcome to comment on the questions as well. Yeah.
I think Manpreet, you can start and then we'll address the
Yeah.
question.
Hi, can you hear me? Yeah. Hello?
Yes,
Yes,
yes, you're
Professor.
on.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I'm trying to share the screen. Can you see the screen? Is it visible? Okay, let me try it once again. All right, let it be. So thanks guys for the opportunity to come and briefly present what the Law and Social Sciences Research Network, LASNet, does, and give you a brief glimpse of how it came to be. Of course, it has been a journey of conversations and friendships, and any kind of work that uh, tries not to fall between these two benches, demands a certain level of camaraderie and mutual support and care, and uh, coming from a more collaborative space rather than a more competitive space between disciplines. It is also a process of continuous conversation and learning and unlearning. And so the LastNet project really took off somewhere around 2009 with the coming of a few scholars, both trained in law and social sciences, who thought about building a community of researchers who can actually study the connection in a more serious way. So Professor Pratiksha Bakshi um, at the Center for the Study of Law and Governance at that time at JNU um, hosted, in a sense, it was anchored in that institution. And there have been at least, I think, three major conferences of the LastNet. The first one was hosted at the Center for Law and Governance. I think the second one was with the Alternative Law Forum in Bangalore and in collaboration among many others. And the third one, I think, in 2016, uh, was hosted in Delhi. So there have been three major conferences. In light of, I just want to just give you a perspective that in light of some sort of what is LastNet? LastNet is not an association like, for example, the Law and Social Law and Society Association, which is the biggest umbrella body of social legal scholars in the world, or the Social Legal Studies Association of the UK. So they don't have, we don't have an organizational setup. There are no fees for membership. It is a community that has come together to pursue social legal studies in India, most primarily. But also, I want to highlight one more fact that it has been an attempt to make it as South Asian as possible in its mandate and scope. So most of the work has been around India and by Indian scholars based either in India or abroad. But we have the the ideal has always been that somehow it can be a space for everybody interested in South Asia to come together. So this brings me to another point where the the anchoring of the network shifted to SOAS last year, and now Professor Mayur Suresh is hosting it there, anchoring it. In between, there have always been um, um, conversations where Professor Siddharth has also been involved with the Center for Law, Governance, and Citizenship at Ambedkar University at one point in time. Right. So I hope this gives you a general idea about what LastNet is. In fact, you can go to the LastNet blog um, and check it out. I would especially recommend that if you go to the blog, which I was trying to show you, on the right side, you will see a blog called The Idea of LastNet. Right. I strongly advise everybody to just read that once. And in fact,
Manpreet, you can type the link in the chat. Yeah.
yeah, okay, I'll do that right now. Okay. Okay, thanks, Nivedita. I can see that it's been shared. I can't type anything here. I'm not allowed to. Okay. Yeah. So, anyways, yeah. Okay. So one thing I just wanted to mention was that it's about institutional citing and a brief comment on the conversations that have been happening. So the LastNet is very keen to have more people participate and join into the conversation. So I think around 500, more than 500 people across the world are currently on the mailing list. And we used to send out a newsletter very often. Now we're in transition phase. But the idea is that you can send an email to lastnet@gmail.com, and we will put you on the mailing list. Also, uh, just as part of a personal journey, I just want to make a comment that coming from a non-law background, how do you do social legal studies, right? I think the foundation for me really has been two electives that I took during my graduate studies. One elective was on science, technology, and society studies, and the second elective was on social legal studies at Ambedkar University. And these have been the two sort of disciplinary arena where I have really forged. And I have always been uh, falling between the two stools. That has been an experiment, and one cannot say that I'm not falling. I'm always falling all the time. But also, LastNet has been a very enriching intellectual and personal journey for me. So that is the space that has allowed me to foray into an area like STS and look at it more closely. So I would just generally advise people who are interested uh, to take up some courses that might be of in the area of your interest, um, especially, right? Another comment that I just want to make is that there have been a whole generation of scholars who have now really matured, including Professor Siddharth here from NLS, uh, including Professor Mayur Suresh, Professor Lawrence Liang, um, forget one, Professor Rohit De, who have really um, had their legal education at NLS, but also they have moved on to do splendid social legal work in various diverse areas of social legal scholarship. As Siddharth already pointed out, social legal studies is a very broad church right now, and there are more and more sects um, um, happening there every day. And the challenge has always been how to be methodologically rigorous in that sense. But that rigor, I think, will only come through more collaboration and um, a slower journey. That's all I wanted to say, right? For everybody who's interested in social legal studies, this is not a quick journey. There have been various phases of learning and unlearning, and social legal studies, in whichever way one can imagine it, um, will always, I think, demand a slightly longer gestation period in terms of any scholarship. So that is something that is not to scare people away, but it is just a longer process of how things go, because we are dealing with at least two main disciplines. For me, for example, it will be sociology of law, but I'm still learning most of the law part, right? And also for people, I don't know how many of you are non-law people, at least Alaka, I can sense that. I would suggest that, as Siddharth mentioned, that even people, even social science people who want to do social legal studies have to actually seriously engage with law, right? That the learning that we need to engage with is also we need to engage with law in its own terms in that sense. So let me stop here. So LastNet is a platform that is open to everybody. Please take a look at the website, and we welcome your engagement um, with us, with everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for that kind introduction. I think it's very vital that we have both scholars whom we can look up to, be inspired from their work, and also, as you mentioned, collaborate and not necessarily compete with them. I think that's particularly important coming from where we are in law school as well. We have a final question. However, we are open to taking more questions as well from Shrishti. Shrishti, if you can unmute and speak. And- Okay, I think Shrishti's microphone doesn't seem to be working, though I will definitely should have been working previously. Okay, I think I'll ask the question in that case.
Uh, Nivedita, it's working now. I think you uh, enabled
Yeah,
it.
you're
Am
audible.
I
Yeah.
audible?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Professor, one question that I wanted to ask was, especially in our elective, sometimes we are asked to engage with different theories like feminist legal theory and to approach law using that theory or to critique law using that theory. But a lot of times we do not have a serious engagement with the theory in the sense that we're not taught or how to engage with the theory or even what the theory is. So, what do you think are some of the problems with some engagement in a legal education when we're not taught those theories and asked to engage with those theories in a college like ours, in a law school, or in a law school setting generally, and how can like that be overcome to help us approach law using these theories more meaningfully actually?
Um, Thanks for that question, Srishti. I think, look, perhaps one way of looking at, I mean, one way I read your question is also maybe depending on elective to elective, because I'm just thinking about, I myself am very interested in offering an elective on law and memory at some point. Okay. And there might be literature which not everybody might have engaged with in their law school journey. Okay. But the way that from I'm saying from perspective of somebody who might offer such a course and who might have included such material, it could also be a way of giving students a chance of engaging with these texts in that setting. Okay, when perhaps even if you're not done the exact, maybe I don't know some theoretical aspect of the reading. Say in your particular case, the example of feminist legal theory, but the fact that we might, as people who are offering these courses, expect that okay, but in your 2 years or 3 years or 4 years of the education, you would have engaged with some aspects of this in some way, even indirectly, and that you at least picked up the skills of how to engage with these kind of texts, not maybe not the content. So, the fact that even if it appears a bit opaque to you and you've not had that kind of training, but the fact that perhaps by reading it in conjunction with the other texts and in that setting, that you might be able to at least grasp some of the basics of that text, and then you are able to bring your own disciplinary grounding and interests in when you actually write your paper, or write in a way, even at that stage, even if you're not doing it in a way that possibly we are talking about with a serious kind of engagement, but at least it's a starting point which will help you then think about, okay, I am writing about this, but I actually don't know what this theory act. And I think more and more now we have the tools, including things like, mm, Google's LM and whatever. So you have the tools, right? So we're having these tools where we're able to access at least the basic literature in a way, summaries and all of these things in a way that we are not able to do before. But obviously, it's very different from learning a course on critical legal studies, etc., or if you have done that. But I think, yeah, so of course, there are these challenges, but in that format of the elective or in certain kinds of courses, there's only that much that. So that's the thing. If we are interested in a topic which is social legal and we're offering a topic social legal, I can't offer an elective on law and memory by thinking, oh no, some of the students will be third year students. They have not read about memory, they may not understand. I can't approach it like that. I have to approach it saying that, okay, I am confident that they have some skills by now and that they are going to be able to make that jump to some extent, even if they're kind of falling in between. But eventually, some of them will be interested and will be able to get there. I think but the way I think I would approach it is like, okay, but at least in the written form, if I'm asking them to write something, I would ask them to do it with the material they're more confident with. So, okay, so if you're more confident doing a doctrinal paper, do it and try to engage with the course from that and leave it open and not expect them to do like social legal method also. So there are ways, I mean, it's an open-ended question because I don't know, each thing is different. But there are ways of looking at it, and hopefully that atmosphere where you're exposed to this material and people who are working on this and the literature and that community will help you. Like Manpreet said, it's a slow process, right? It can't happen over a 3-month period of an elective. Hopefully the next elective, maybe you might be interested, you might feel more confident in taking a social legal topic, saying, in fact, the whole course that I've been teaching now, so and some of my students are on this call, is basically human rights law and theory is a social legal course. I'm not teaching a purely doctrinal for the third years. Neither am I teaching a social science course. It's a social legal course, is how I would understand it. And the students, I feel like most of my students have been able to, engage with it, even though it's slightly different. And some of them are a bit confused about, okay, what is this? It's not law, it's not this thing. But eventually, if you read their papers and the way they've approached it and the classroom discussion, then really being able to make that jump.
Uh, Thank you, Professor. I have just one more question, if I can ask, related to this. Like sometimes, especially as law student, what I feel is that I find it very difficult when we read some social legal engagement and we don't have a deeper understanding of different texts and different authors and what they're writing. We find every kind of material very convincing and every type of argument that people are making and critiquing very convincing. So I just find it very difficult how to like select and how to think about and how to go about those materials and then what to read and what and just how to think about things from that perspective. Very difficult when you're finding everything in your limited knowledge so convincing.
Look, I don't think that's a problem limited to social legal research. I think it's a universal problem limited to any kind of pedagogy, any kind of learning where obviously we are limited in the way. Even if I were to read, I read for my research certain material, I find I'm very easily convinced about a particular argument. I get very enthusiastic, and then my PhD supervisor would have to say, "Where's your voice? And why are you just like parroting this particular argument, and what do you think?" So I've also, I mean, it's not just at your stage, it's at any stage that we but the point is, I think, is the exercise of it, being able to engage with the literature, being able to read and understand what the literature says. And sometimes even the if we just repeat saying that, okay, this is the argument and this is the argument, but how do we then find that voice where slowly over a period of time, slowly, gradually, we find some perspective. And I did my PhD over 4.5 years, 4 years and 4 months. Only doing. I didn't work. I only did work means that was my work. Only doing PhD. 4 years and 4 months. Even then, at the end product, I was told in the first draft, "Where is your voice? What do you think?" And you're just repeating. So the point is that you do it for 3 months, you do it for 4 years. Eventually, we have to be able to slowly be able to, then think about, okay, where is our voice in this? What do we think about the literature? It's a very gradual, long-term process. So I wouldn't worry too much about these things. Are we doing it with ethically right? Are we doing it with good intent? Are we engaging with the literature? Are we actually reading it? And then thinking about what we think. I think that all these things will happen slowly. I wouldn't worry too much.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Professor. So I think we have Manhar and Jyotika's questions. I think we can have a wrap on our session after that. Manhar, please go ahead.
Hi. Thank you everyone for your comments. So a question I had was that often what we see in social legal work, and I mean, this also happens in other work, but especially so in social legal work, is that you apply a theoretical framework to a legal problem, right? So you say that, okay, like there's a legal problem of, um, I don't know, for instance, marital rape, and like Srishti said, you will apply a feminist legal theory on that. Or, for instance, I am currently writing a paper for an elective where I am saying I'm looking at like letters written from death row, which are collected by Project at 9A, and I'm saying, okay, I'll apply what Derrida is saying in his death penalty seminars to this. But we often also see professors and teachers and academics saying that this applying theory framework is not a very helpful framework to work with. You should, like, theory should flow from your material and from the problem, and it shouldn't be that you're getting some theory from some place and just applying over it. But I find that very hard. I mean, obviously, to theorize yourself from the material is much harder than applying theory to a problem. And I was wondering if you have any thoughts on that, on how do you kind of learn, or at least try to theorize from your material and from the problem, rather than take a theoretical framework and then just say, oh, look, this theory seems to be applicable here. Because that's often what mostly happens, right? You'll say, oh, look, Foucault is applicable here, or someone is applicable here. So, yeah.
Okay, that's a very interesting question, and I would respond to that in two ways. One is, I think, even application of theory, as simple as it sounds, application of theory to a particular problem, it's not simple. I mean, it requires, for you to apply Derrida to or Foucault to a particular, I don't know, prison problem or whatever you're dealing with, you would have to have understood and really engaged with that literature that these philosophers are writing about. And I think that if you're able to do that seriously, as we were talking about, if you're able to do that seriously, I think that in itself is something. It's a big thing, if you ask me. Now, the second, so I mean, if a student, or a scholar is able to really apply, understand and apply this, I think that there's not that much work, actually speaking, where people are applying, especially if you're applying it to, say, doctrinal work, or you're applying it to like a particular legal problem, for the context that we are working in as law students. I think that's a big contribution in itself, if you ask me. But of course, if you want to go the second part of your question, that theory flows from your work. I think that sort of thing only comes with very, very, very kind of multiple iterations. We're able to really have worked on that for a very long time. You're really sitting with the material. You've worked over it, I don't know, over years. So sort of like slow cooking. So you're really imbibed it in a way where you're able to push through the work that you're doing. Now, there might be some kinds of work where this, for instance, if you're doing it through praxis, you might have done some kind of a thing. Now, I'm involved with the Queer Archive, Camera at NLS. So some of the archival practices, for instance, if I approach a paper through archival practices, actually the nitty gritty of it, then there might be certain kinds of things that you're doing which might be through what you are doing. You might be engaged with a particular NGO over a period of time or done some ethnography. Through that, you might be able to push the envelope a little bit more. But more generally speaking, this thing of working through the material and theorizing from it, I mean, I, you're talking about it, that's quite a high level. That's a very, very high level of, very rare that you would find any scholars doing that, let alone law students doing that. And that's quite a high ambition to to attempt. And if you really want to do it in a way, in a serious way. But very quickly, a related point just reminded me, not direct just to what you're saying, is that often this relates to the how you approach writing social legal work. And that is often, people think, like, we think about the topic and we frame the argument before writing, but actually a lot of the thinking happens through the writing. I think it's not exactly what you're saying, I know, but I just reminded me that often the thinking comes through the actual practice of writing. So the practice of writing sometimes will help you think through your topic. Okay.
I suppose I could go ahead now. Yeah. Good afternoon, professors. Thank you. My question goes a little bit to some things that Professor Manpreet was flagging. Just a little bit of context to frame my question. I'm doing the LLB program at NLS, and I have prior training in history. And I very consciously think of this as training to do intersectional work later on at within those disciplines. And I was curious about the community that LastNet is in terms of how students can engage with it as it operates currently. So in terms of, say, publications or conferences, things like that, but also like the way students can sort of engage with work with scholars in the field of social legal work in India right now, South Asia more broadly, and think of like our current training at the law school as a way of doing this kind of work after we graduate. So something along those lines is what I'm curious about.
Manpreet, do you want to take that question and I can add if needed in terms of.
Uh, yeah. Just so you're from you did history, is that right? Um,
Yes.
yeah, and you're now looking at it. Okay. Also wanted to. So there are various ways to go about it. One way is, of course. Let me just start with where I'm coming from. If you're a historian, then there is a very sort of established sort of branch of legal history where you do that kind of work, right? Like, so you can look up the work of Mitra Sharafi, or Radhika. What Radhika? The Despotism of Law.
It's
Radhika
Radhika
Singh.
Siddharth. Hmm.
Yes, Radhika Singh. Sorry. So you can look it up, and if you can just scan through the LastNet blog. There are various webinars that have been done. A lot of legal historical work is happening where you work with archives, etc. And please look up Mitra Sharafi's blog on South Asia. That's, I think, the best blog, curated blog on the question of South Asian legal history. That's actually the most fantastic resource I can find. But you might also not want to do a very archival legal history approach, and you might want to do various other kinds of methodologies and use various methods which are non-historical. In that case, also you can look up readings and ideas that interest you um, through the LastNet blog. There is okay, so there are in a sense of institutional or just knowledge epistemic communities um, in the area of law and history or legal history. You have the classic, American Association for Legal History kind of thing. But now there is also an Asian Association for Legal History. I think Radhika Singh is a big part of that. Some sort of coalition around legal history is also emerging in NLS because they are going to host a conference in that area. The Core Archive is one fantastic site that needs more exploration, at least from a historic archival perspective. So legal history itself is an established area. But in terms of law and society, you have the Law and Society Association. In Asia, you have the Asian Law and Society Association and LastNet, etc. Right? So, but please look up Mitra Sharafi's blog. I think that's the best curated blog on legal history. Institutionally, coming to NLS and where you can go from here, I think that there are historians and who look at archives now at NLS, and there are archives available, so you can look at that. In terms of other trainings and other methods, interdisciplinary training, you can also pick up, I think, courses maybe in sociology or politics, whatever interests you, and have conversations with faculty who are there. As a student body, how can you engage further? I think it will be more about conversations, and also about like maybe we'll have to find ways of at least kind of bringing some of this some of you who are interested together. I mean, there's already a uh, brilliantly curated South SLR journal and blog, and so we'll have to look at that. But yeah, Siddharth, you have something to share more?
Yeah. So, Jyotika, I think one of the nice things about you having a history background and then having this 3-year LLB training is that you will be able to bring to the scholarship that internal perspective, right? That internal understanding of how the law functions. So the doctrine, for instance, how doctrine functions. So you would have engaged with those kind of questions much more than your peers who might be historians, even historians who are teaching here at NLS who have not engaged with those questions. Okay, they're only trying to do it organically, but they may not be trained like that, but you are being trained. So there are many kinds of interesting things. Now, Devika Sethi's work, who I'm familiar with, who writes about free speech in 19 like a particular period, early independence period, and the late colonial period in India. For instance, her work, despite not being trained in law, or somebody like Arudra Bura, who's not a historian but deals with history of free speech, they're all the kinds of work in this community, the amount that I might rely on their work is a lot. So the kind of interesting intersections between uh, the way they deal with doctrine and the way that we understand doctrine. But you have that, I think, opportunity, somebody of your training, to actually also engage with the doctrinal work in a more rigorous way and this kind of literature. So kind of bring that. There's a lot of, I think, potential in that kind of combination. If, and then kind of looking at the social legal community and social legal things. So just some immediate thoughts. But yeah, so these are all these people's work who I'm talking about are not actually trained in the law, but you are going to be trained in the law. So perhaps Rohit Day, for instance, the way that he's looking at the constitution, early days of the constitution, kind of bringing some that internal understanding into the picture.
Right, that was very
Can I
helpful.
just add one more suggestion? You can also look up, although she's not a legal person, you can look up Aparna Vedic's work. I find it
Right.
quite fascinating right now.
Right. Thank you so much. I suppose if there are no further questions, we could move towards closing the session. And before we do that, I would just like to speak a little bit about what we do as a journal for participants outside NLS who are joining. Just give me a moment. Right. So the Social Legal Review, or SLR, we are a peer-reviewed biannual journal run by students at the National Law School. We were established in 2005. So in the coming year, we are entering our 20th anniversary. And our focus has been on publishing interdisciplinary research that explores the intersections of the law and the social sciences in a South Asian context. On multiple occasions, our work has received recognitions from the judiciary. For instance, we have been cited by the Supreme Court in landmark cases such as Justice Puttaswamy versus Union of India and in Joseph Shine, and also by the High Court of Uttarakhand in Tanuja Tolia versus State of Uttarakhand. In terms of the areas of our engagement, these have been very wide, from ethnographic studies to legal history, critical perspectives like feminist, queer, and anti caste studies, to also areas like public policy, environmental studies, bioethics, as well as the law's intersection with literature, film, and media. Our latest issue, which is volume 19, issue 2, is a special issue on street vendors and the law. And in the next few months, we will also be releasing both issues of volume 20, of whose issue 2 will be a special anniversary issue that critically reviews the state of socio-legal scholarship today and trends within this. Many of these issues we have been discussing in the last hour. And this will call attention to unexplored themes and establish future lines of inquiry within the field. So we are looking forward to that. A little bit about our editorial policies. We invite contributions for articles, notes from the fields, that is, narratives emerging from fieldwork and people who engage in practice, case comments and legislative comments, as well as book reviews. Our editorial and review process is both double anonymized. We aim to run a streamlined review process, and we are committed to returning to authors with speedy decisions. There are three main steps in our editorial process: an internal review among editors, which takes about 2 weeks, the peer review process, which takes somewhere between 4 to 6 weeks usually. And then this may go on to further revisions of the draft and an evaluation of the revised manuscript. And then finally, we move on to finalizing the manuscript. Itself takes about 6 weeks or so. Apart from the journal, which is published biannually, we also run a very active online blog called the SLR Forum, where we published smaller themes, smaller pieces on more contemporary issues. And to learn more and read more about our editorial policies as well as the aims and scope of the journal, please do look our website up. We will just drop a link in the chat as well. And thank you so much for joining us today. We hope it was a meaningful way of spending your morning today. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Jyotika, and thank you, Professor.